Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today I have a beginner watercolor tutorial for you. So if you're new, this is a good one. We're going to start off by misting our watercolors and our paper using just clear water. I'm using a fine mist spray bottle that you can find on Amazon or any hair supply place. And before that, I did tape off this page in my sketchbook so I'd have some nice white borders when I'm done, because it always makes your painting look nice. Now I popped the reference photo up there in the area over my sketchbook so you can see what we're painting. This lovely sunset with some ripply water in front. I'm omitting the bridge that is going across the paper there. The color I'm using is cadmium yellow pale hue, and the color set I'm using is from the Phoenix Watercolor Artist Grade Tube Set. I'm adding some cad yellow hue in there too, just because it seemed a little cool. I needed a little bit warmer. I didn't want my sky to go green when I started blending, so just a cad yellow hue would work good for that, and you could use whatever brand of paints you have. I will have a full tutorial on this set of 24 Phoenix Artist Grade watercolors coming up in a few days if you want to check that out. But I paid $13.99 for this set on Amazon, and I thought it was a good deal. So I don't know how long the price will stay at that rate, but if you're looking for a good set of kind of basic student grade watercolors that are Cotman quality, they're a good set to pick up. Now I added some permanent rose into the area right about where the horizon line is going to be, so it could kind of blend in with that yellow and get a little orange, but we still have that little band of pink there underneath. And I'm going to add a weak blue into the top of the sky area. And you want to make sure you clean your brush really well. And the brushes I'm using are my signature brushes through Craft Ammo. I will have a link to those, and I'm using the large flat brush. So the blue I'm using here was actually a color that I didn't really like from this set. It's called Verde Blue, and it is a mix of PB28, which is cobalt blue. That's all that says on the tube, but I'm pretty sure it's got some fillers and extenders in there, probably a PW4 white, because it is a very weak color, but it does work well for this situation where I want to paint blue into a sky and I don't want it to turn the yellow green or be like too concentrated. I'm taking that color also and adding it into the water area because I wanted to just kind of make sure that water area is uniformly wet and has a really light sheen of blue there, which would be kind of like my lightest highlights. If you look at the reference photo and look at those highlights, you're going to see they have either a little bit of a blue cast to them or a little bit of a pink cast to them because it's reflecting the sky color. So that worked out really well. I'm also using some of this cerulean blue hue, which is simply a phthalo blue that's a little bit leaning more towards turquoise. So you've got that color, and I'm also going to be using some phthalo blue in there just to pump up the color a little bit as needed. So I am using probably more colors than I typically would just for a beginner tutorial, but I was doing this painting in preparation for my review, so I do like to use a lot of colors just to kind of see how they perform and how they paint out, so I can do a good assessment. But if you don't have that many colors on your palette, don't worry, just use the closest that you have, and it's going to be just as good. So nothing to worry about. Now I took some of that phthalo blue, added a little bit of the permanent rose to it. I'm making this kind of purpley color kind of a desaturated purple, not a really bright one. There is violet in this set that's very strong, but I didn't want a strong purple. I just wanted a kind of grayed down purple for those mountains in the background. And you can see there's a little bit of a mountaintop peeking out above the mist there on the left-hand side of the reference photo. And I'll link the reference photo down below, so if you want to blow it up big and look at it, you can see what I'm talking about there. But and as I paint that purpley color over the yellow, it just kind of grays down, which is just what I want. I want this faraway misty mountain back there. I thought it added some nice depth and would be good to add into the painting. Now I'm mixing up a less watery, stronger purple here, and I'm using the cerulean blue hue and the permanent rose so it doesn't get too dark, but I also don't want it watery, so I used a weaker blue than the phthalo blue for that. And I am tracing the tips of the mountain there because I want the top of the little mountains to be a little bit darker, so it kind of fades into the mist as you get down closer to the horizon line. And as you can see, I did omit that the bridge that's going across. I don't think it really adds anything to it other than dividing the sky from the water, and I wanted them to kind of flow together a little bit more. But of course you can do whatever you want. You could put some elements in there in silhouette even. It's completely up to you. This is a really nice kind of background, a really nice background, which it's pretty on its own, but you could definitely do more, like add birds or whatever you like into your painting. Now I want to start working in the water. Now keep in mind our paper is still wet, so I'll be able to do those wet into wet, kind of soft waves. Okay, so I'm using some phthalo blue. I'm also using some of that cerulean blue hue, but that's essentially phthalo blue. It's kind of one of those samey colors on the palette that kind of annoyed me in my review, but I'm just using a lot of different colors here because I'm preparing for the review, as I mentioned before. But anyway, I took some of the that phthalo blue, mixed it with some burnt umber, and got a really pretty kind of like really desaturated deep teal. And now I'm adding some Payne's gray to the purple that's on my palette, and I'm also adding some cerulean blue into that to help harmonize it and to also just kind of get kind of an earthy, inky, darker color. So I'll be using both of those colors to build some of these deep undulating ripples in the water. So up here where I'm close to the horizon line, which is where the water and the sky meet, or the land and the sky meet, where the water's meeting the mountains, that's the furthest point away from the viewer. So you're going to have smaller ripples there, and the ripples are going to get larger as you work towards the bottom of your paper. And kind of the bottom of your paper, that's kind of like where you are viewing this painting from, and you're going to see these little waves and ripples being larger because you're closer to them. And by painting it like this, with the bigger ripples closer to the bottom of your paper and the smaller ripples closer to the horizon, that's going to give you depth, and that's going to make this feel a little bit more realistic. So the nice thing about a dagger brush is that you can use the tip of it for a fine ripple, you can use the wide belly of the brush for a wider ripple, and you can just kind of get everywhere in between. So it's kind of a fun brush to use. Plus, because it's not just a round or not just a flat, you get a little bit more variety without really thinking about it too much. So it is kind of fun, a fun landscape tool for anyone, especially a beginner. If all your brush strokes are starting to look the same, this can help you. And I'm adding some of that up into the mountaintops too, just to kind of give it a little bit of cross-pollination and color harmony. Because I am using a lot of colors here, so it's like, to harmonize things up a little bit. And pretty much any color we've used is fair game. So I took a little of that yellow, added a little bit more of this cerulean blue, and made this teal color that would be kind of some of the lighter values, some of the other greeny colors that we see. And like I mentioned before, you can take that reference photo that's linked down below and you can blow it up. You can look at the detail and get a much better look at it than what I can show you on the screen. And feel free to pause the video. I painted this in real time in under 20 minutes, but if you're a beginner, it may take you longer. And I'm voicing this over, so I tend to talk faster in my voiceovers, I think. So if you're getting overwhelmed by my speech, you can obviously mute me, or you can slow down the video, or you can just pause as needed. Do what works for you, because that's kind of what you got to do when you're learning how to paint. Now I'm using some of the, actually this is a warmer looking blue. I think I might have grabbed some ultramarine blue. I'm not sure, but it is a warmer looking blue. Could have been the Verdi blue. And I'm putting in some of those warmer tones, kind of looks like the sky reflections a little bit. And I am grabbing a little bit of the permanent rose, adding that into some of that mid yellow that we used in the sky. And I'll add some of that into the highlight areas. And I'm blotting out excess moisture from my brush before I do that, because I don't want to have backgrounds or cauliflowers into my damp wash here. So when your paper's damp, if you go in with a wet brush that's much wetter than your paper, that's where you get cauliflowers. So you need to have that kind of balance in your painting. So just kind of keep that in mind. So at this point, I want to dry everything, because the next layer that I'm going to paint, I want my lines to be nice and crisp. And I just edited out some of the drying time because that's a little boring to watch, but you just want to dry up the paper essentially, and then kind of feel it with your hand. And if it feels cool, then you still need to dry it some more. If it feels room temperature, you're fine. And now I am going in with the Payne's Gray with some of my palette mud there, adding a little bit of phthalo blue to it to cool down the Payne's Gray a little bit. And I'll be adding in more of the crisp ripples that we see. So those dark ripples that you see in the reference photo in the water, that would be the ripples that are facing the face of the water that's facing away from the light. So as the water's moving, you have all these different facets to the water, and some are facing the light, some are facing away from the light, some are facing the sky. That's why you see all of these different tones in the water. You see some blue that's mimicking the lighter blue in the sky. You see some of that that pinky orange color that's from the orangey part of the sky, you're going to see all of those tones duplicated in the water. And then you're also going to see these darker tones, which are the shadows that's facing away from those light sources. And sometimes you can even see down in through into the depths of the water, but generally not when it's this choppy. So you just kind of have to worry about getting those darker, hard-edged ripples in at this point, because you've put all those lighter tones in already. So you don't need to worry about those. And like I mentioned before, you're going to have larger shapes at the bottom of your paper and smaller shapes as you get closer to the horizon. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're putting in those details. As you're painting this, I don't want you to think that you're painting water. Okay, take that right out of your mind. What I want you to do is look at the reference photo or look at what I'm painting, and I want you to say, I'm painting abstract blue shapes, okay? And just try to recreate those abstract blue marks, okay? That is going to make your water look more realistic when you're done, trust me, because we have this preconceived idea in our minds about what water looks like, right? And we're picturing these waves crashing on the shore, right? Or we're picturing these ripples in the water, and but our mind doesn't really have all of the information that we need to recreate that scene. So that's why we can use a reference photo and look at those sections. And if you downloaded the reference photo I linked, you could even just zoom into the water and just look at that abstract group of shapes. And that's really going to help you more than anything, because when you try to paint something the way, like realistically, your brain wants to butt in and say, oh, I know what that looks like. This is how you paint it. And you have to ignore what your brain thinks, and you need to look at what your eyes think. Now, here's a trick. Sometimes I get a little crooked on my horizon, and an easy way to fix that is to take a piece of tape, and I like to use washi tape because, well, I'm kind of a stationery collector and I have a ton of it, but painter's tape will work well. Just maybe stick it onto your clothes first so it de-sticks it a little bit. You can set that down on your paper and you can dry brush up against it and get that perfectly straight horizon line. So I would recommend trying that if you have a hard time, or if your horizon line tends to lean a little bit. Now, if you are painting on a sheet of paper and your horizon line is a little bit crooked and you intend on framing it, you can just kind of tip it in your behind your mat in your frame and make that, straight as an arrow. But this is in my sketchbook and I knew I needed a little help. So a little washi tape will help you there. Now, I'm just going a little bit lighter in tone and value and using that kind of cerulean blue color and adding some tiny little choppy marks near the horizon. And basically just kind of look at your values, look at your shapes, forget your painting water, and just try to recreate those shapes that you see. Now, I think because I'm really giving you a lot of information on this, I usually narrate tutorials like this as I'm doing them. And, hindsight's 2020. And I think of all these tips I want to share. So if you are a brand new beginner and you've never really painted much before, or you've never painted water, watching this through, listening to the commentary, and then when you go to paint it, maybe just turning the sound off, and feel free to use that pause button and then go through again so that you're not distracted. Because I want to give you all these tips and tricks, but I don't want to distract you as you're painting. So I just want to offer that as an option if you feel overwhelmed when you're listening to me during a tutorial, especially a voiceovered one. Because I see those comments of like, she's going too fast, you talk too fast, and I really try to slow it down, but I get excited because it's painting and I love to paint, and I think of all these things that I want to share, and I know that it can be a bit much. So that would be my advice for that. I'm adding a little more pink. Actually, I'm really kind of pushing the colors here a bit, and I like to do that. I like to exaggerate colors. You don't have to, but I think the reference photo is a little bit dull in tone, and it looks like it almost has like a vignette filter on it. So I think it's kind of cutting a little bit of that vibrancy. And I know whenever I take a reference photo of a sunset or a sunrise, I never get the vibrancy that I see in real life. So I like to use my artistic license there and just increase my colors a little bit and my reflections a little bit. And that's up to you if you want to do that or not. You certainly don't have to. Now that should come off really easily because, for one, I didn't press it down real hard because I was dry brushing against it, and also my paper was dry, so it should be pretty safe. You never want to take off tape when your paper is really wet. Now you could leave this pretty much the way it is if you wanted to, but I wanted to test out the Chinese white that came in this set, so I just wet my brush and pick some up from the dry pan to see how it would re-wet. And I'm going in and adding some highlights onto the waves. Now, Chinese white is not an opaque white. It's not going to give you a really bright highlight, but it can give you those soft, subtle highlights that you see in the reference photo. It's not really that necessary, but it can help unify those highlights. And like I said, I was preparing to review these paints, so I just wanted to see how that color re-wet and if it was at all useful. It's a very subtle highlight if you want to use it that way, but really what the Chinese white is for thinning down your brighter colors when you want a pastel, but you don't want to add so much water that you make it really watery and runny. So it's basically to keep the viscosity in your paints while making them lighter in tone. So you can use water to do that to any of your brighter colors, but sometimes that viscosity is an issue, especially if you're doing kind of an illustration. So, you know, it does have a purpose. It does have a purpose, but it's it kind of does bum me out when they use white, when they add white to a set of paints, because there's so many more useful colors, and you know, I have so many tubes of white, Chinese white from different sets that I've tried over the years. But anyways, it does seem to be useful for its purpose, as long as you're not expecting a really bright highlight. Now, if you did want a really bright highlight on this, there are some options. You could use white gouache, which is an opaque white watercolor. You could use a white gel pen or a white paint pen, or, I mean, you could even use a white colored pencil or some chalk. But, you know, there's always a white of the paper. That's sort of traditional route, but you can do whatever you like, to be honest. Nowadays, you know, anything goes for a lot of things in art, I think. And remember, same thing with your highlights as with your shadows. You want your smaller strokes in the back and your lighter strokes in the front. So the wider strokes in the front, I mean, closer to the viewer. Now I'm just going to give this one quick last dry before I remove the tape. That's always my favorite part, and we get to see the final painting and how it turned out. I think this is a great way to practice water, and if you're a beginner, a wonderful way to get a little practice in. So I do hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please give me a thumbs up if you liked it. Share it with a friend maybe that would like it. And thank you so much for watching. Here you can see a photo of the finished project, and like I said, all supplies and reference photo will be linked down below. Thanks for watching. Until next time, happy crafting.